All right, everyone. This is The Attitude with Arnie Arnesen and Susan Bruce. And, of course, Susan picks our music. This is a Union Town is the song she picked. And obviously, I think we're going to be talking about unions. And as a point of information, everyone, one of my earliest childhood memories, not my earliest, but one of my earliest, was when I was marching with my father in front of Gracie Mansion in the longest teacher strike in New York City history. Thank you, Mayor Lindsay. I can even tell you what color culottes I was wearing as I was wearing my sandwich placard. And I'm looking on the wall at one of the signs from that strike, and it says, "We must have better schools. No contract, no work. United Federation of Teachers, AFL-CIO." So just to sort of set the stage. So why am I giving you this point of information? Because joining us right now on the line is Phil Cohen. He has written a book entitled "The Jackson Project: War in the American Workplace, a Memoir." And I want to welcome Phil to the program. How are you, Phil?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Annie.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So you sent us the book, and Cy Khan wrote your foreword.
That's
and
right.
For those who don't know, he is a singer-songwriter, an activist, and the former executive director of Grassroots Leadership. And there was a paragraph, and Susan said, you got to read this paragraph out loud, because it really does, I think, set the stage, not only for this conversation, but for really understanding how, in a way, nothing has changed, Phil. Nothing has changed. And this election kind of proves it. And here's what Cy writes. "Those who are poor, exploited, ridiculed, pushed around, paid far less than either they or their labor are worth, are always angry. They may come across as polite, quiet, seeking to please, not wanting to offend. Best employee I ever had," close quotes. But the anger is always there, underneath the veneer, desperately wanting to break through to the surface and beyond. The rage that life and work have to be so unbearably hard, so wrenching, so wearying, so breaking down of body and soul, draining the sweetness from everything, when with only a little bit of justice, a little bit of fairness, of someone looking at you with care and treating you with respect, it could be so much easier. That was Cy Khan and part of his introduction to Phil Cohen's book, The Jackson Project. So, Phil, set the stage for us, not just about this book, but, who the H is Phil Cohen? Why should we read a memoir by you? And how did you get to the place where you decided you at least needed to tell one of the stories in your pretty interesting life?
Okay, well, look, I left home when I was 16 years old, so suffice it to say I didn't have much of a childhood. I was on the streets of New York, lied about my age for 3 years, and did blue-collar work for 20 years. For 8 of those years, I was the leader of my own rank-and-file local union, and in 1988, I was hired by what was then the Clothing and Textile Workers Union. And just one of the few books about unions actually written by someone who lived the life, an organizer who lived the fight.
Yeah.
Most books about unions are written by intellectuals standing on the outside looking in. And no matter how well researched a book is on any subject, if you haven't lived it, you can't really know what it felt like. You might know what happened, but not what it felt like. And that anger, that frustration that Cy Khan so eloquently described in the foreword, I lived that. So when I stand in front of folks in a local union and they're feeling that, I can talk to them from a place where I've been there, and this is what I did about it. And so I've got the authority to share with you what you can do about it.
So you were active in your union in New York. You were hired by the textile workers to go down to North Carolina. You're still living...
Actually, just to back forward, I signed my first union card in New York. I was actually a taxi driver at night in New York City for a number of years. But then I moved down south.
Okay.
And in North Carolina, actually in the town of Chapel Hill, I got a job as a city bus driver, which had a local union, which quite frankly really didn't do a whole lot to represent the employees. And I ended up getting elected chief steward and took over the business of representing employees. And one thing led to another till I got hired by Act Two.
Wow. So this Jackson Project is really your first, is this like your first really big experience doing something, taking on, the textile industry in North Carolina up until, 30 years ago, that was the definition of North Carolina until virtually all the textile mills disappeared. I mean, you were fighting sort of at the end of the opportunity, not at the very beginning of it. And
Yes,
like everything else, you're desperate to hold on.
This was my second campaign for the union. My first was in South Carolina, and this one was actually out in West Tennessee. But yeah, you're right. It's kind of the last generation of the textile industry in America, which obviously got decimated by the free trade agreements in the mid-'90s.
So you write this book because you want people to understand what it's like from someone who has lived it, who's been hurt by it, who understands how management has reacted, who understands how it is to try to pull people in and to give them courage, because it must be, as Cy wrote, it's really hard because in a way you always feel like, I hate to use the term that you would use in the Old South, especially before the Civil War, but I always feel like the employer is yes, massa, no, massa, yes, massa. And the idea is you need that job. So how do you challenge the person who's, providing you with that paycheck? And yet at the same time, when you're realizing that the paycheck isn't keeping your family whole, and when you're realizing that the paycheck isn't growing as your expenses are growing, then the disconnect between your hard work and what you see in remuneration makes it even more difficult to show up every day, because it's not possible to take care of the families that you are there to raise.
Yeah, that's very true. And, the standard of living in this country for the average person has been declining for quite some time. This separation between Main Street and Wall Street lifestyles has been the rift has been getting greater and greater over the years. The thing about the textile industry, it was one of the most anti-union industries in America. In fact, I presented a lot of cases in arbitration over the years, and arbitrators would often say to me, so what's it like trying to survive in hostile textile country? And the image I always had was kind of like the Knights Templar in the Middle East. Not to get into who was right or wrong in that particular conflict, because that's a pretty complicated issue, but you had the Knights Templar, and they had these strongholds throughout the Middle East where they were pretty powerful and had a lot of influence. But you step 2 feet outside and you get an arrow through your head because you're in enemy territory. And that's kind of what the textile union was like. We were the biggest union in the South, and we had strongholds, but we were surrounded by enemies on every front.
So how did it work? Because you were recognizing that the industry was slipping away, and these people had lived this industry. This might have been second or even third generations that were working for these companies. They knew things were changing. How do you put a stake in the ground in 1989 and think that it's going to stick for these people? It's one thing to win, but in the end, what did you win, Phil?
See, in 1989, nobody had a crystal ball and envisioned NAFTA. Yeah. The industry was declining in the wake of foreign competition, but there still was a robust textile industry in the South. And so, not envisioning what was going to happen with NAFTA and other free trade agreements, we were actually going out and organizing lots of new textile mills, because we felt that we were in a position finally where we had the leverage to really make some serious inroads in that industry.
Wow. So
the page of history had not yet turned.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit. Give us, this is a long memoir, lots of stories, lots of pages. If you have to sort of share 2 vignettes from this piece to give people a sense of what the struggle was like, what the pushback was like, why it was how did you hold people together? I guess that's the biggest thing. How do you hold people together who, they don't want to fight the boss, but at the same time, they know something has to change?
Okay. First thing I would say is that a good organizer organizes in concentric circles. You start by meeting with the 1 or 2 key people in the local, and then you meet with the committee, and then you meet with all the shop stewards, and then from there, once you have a foundation, you engage the rank and file. Very often in a troubled situation, people in leadership position are kind of there more by default because everyone's gotten so discouraged and because they're really leaders. It's about identifying who the real leaders of that local are, like who has the potential to really lead for the right reason.
Right.
Training them, developing them, helping them get into a position where they can lead. There's two reasons why people become active in a union local. And some people are going to find this not PC enough for their taste, but this is the real world, and I deal in real world, not PC. Two reasons people become a local union leader. The wrong reason is because it's a vehicle for their own ego, their own anger, their own power trip.
Right.
The right reason is because they have a sense of altruism, of being their brother's keeper, and very often those people are really reluctant warriors, and I talk about that in the book. Most of the best union leaders that I've mentored during my career, I had to really sit down with them, take them out to dinner, and really coach them. Because their attitude was always, well, I can't be good enough. There's got to be someone better. I want the best person to have the job, and it's not me.
Right. Well, I mean, think about it. They didn't sign up for this. They signed up to go to work. They signed to come home and have dinner with the family. They signed up to watch their kid play Little League. They did not sign up to help organize, to take on the bus, to spend endless hours, to do things that are so outside anything they ever imagine. I mean, no one raises you saying, what is it going to be like to be a union organizer? No one raises you to say, what is it like going to be an activist in a union? What's it like to go on strike? Who teaches you about this? I mean, there's nothing in school that explains what this is about. You said to me why this book is so important is that you may be the first person who actually was, in the belly of the beast, the organizer, writing a book about his experience. Well, I can introduce you to a lot of CEOs who've written books, but this kind of tells you why it's such a hard sell because no one has prepared you to have to sell this.
The thing, again, organizing, it's really about inspiring people. You connect with people in a way that lights them up, where you're not coming from a doctrine or a philosophy, but you're coming from your heart. You're coming from your own hard-won experience. And just a light comes on in their eyes.
So
it's about making it entertaining, an empowering situation. That becomes exciting because it works.
Okay, so we talked off air, and I talked about the fact that in a way, that entertainment piece, that exciting piece, the idea that, while it's tough, it's also fun. And I kind of look at Donald Trump's campaign, which was entertaining and exciting and kind of fun, and you wanted to be on the bus, and you wanted to wait 17 hours to get into that room with, 15,000 of your closest friends, all these kinds of things. So tell me how you make union organizing and you hold these people together and you can still bring this idea of the sort of entertainment piece, the exciting piece. What is it? Give me an example of that. I mean, you've done it. I want to see it.
You raised a really interesting point. How am I different from Donald Trump? And so let me address that.
Okay.
Because in some ways we did the same thing. But he appealed to the negative emotions in folks.
Yeah.
I appeal to the positive emotions.
2 points. That was Bernie.
That is the difference.
Yeah.
Because you can involve people and pull them together both ways. You asked me for a vignette from the book.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one that illustrates this. One of the things I would do when I went into a situation is really identify what the real unresolved workplace issues were that legally or contractually had merit.
Okay.
Like pick fights that are winnable and that are going to make a difference if you do win.
And they also highlight the unfairness and that you're there and that you're justifiably there to fix something that is clearly patently unfair.
Absolutely.
Right,
So
gotcha.
I found in the weaving department that the weavers had to work standing on their feet 12-hour shifts with no breaks.
Oh, my God.
And I was astonished when I, called our legal department and found there was absolutely no law in the state of Tennessee requiring work breaks.
Oh.
And even though those were in the contract, management had found what they thought was a very clever loophole around it. So ultimately, I initiated a class action grievance that had all the weavers sign it, which just in and of itself is a kind of a
Remarkable.
show of force to
Exactly.
the company.
Exactly.
And then using a loophole in the contract to my advantage, which refers to a meeting of with the grievant or grievance.
Yep.
I forced the plant manager to meet with the entire weaving department and me as their spokesperson. And I said, look, you got a choice. Contractually, we can have 100 separate meetings. If each of these people sign the grievance, so they're entitled to an audience, or we can have one meeting. Which do you want to do? And it's an offer that I've never had a plant manager able to refuse.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And so we had the meeting, and after my presentation, the weaving department was able to, in the safe presence of a union rep that could hold management accountable
Right.
to confront the plant manager. And they left that meeting with an hour worth of paid breaks every day.
Well, as you're describing this, I want to, again, it is the power of the group. You are so vulnerable. Even if you're with me, Phil, and I have to go address the employer, going one-on-one or even one with an advocate, you are still terrified. You only know your story. You're by yourself. There's nothing to mirror your anger and your sense of resentment and unfairness. But when you're in a room with all those other people who clearly are in the same place as you, you know that you're justified, and it kind of makes your spine even steeler because you know that you're not alone in this. And I think the idea of not being alone in the unfairness is what gives you the capacity to push forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But the ultimate bluff, I write about this in the book, the ultimate bluff of every small group of people that dominates a large group of people is that they can keep people divided.
Yes.
And they're never going to stick together. And something I've said in front of many a union local, you take 10 people, and I don't care if they're all John Wayne and Arnold Schwarzenegger rolled into one, confront them with 100 people or 500 people, and they cannot stand up to it. Call their bluff.
Well, not only do you call their bluff, but what you realize is that here you had, I don't know how many weavers there were, but here you have all these people who are working 12 hours with no breaks. How many hours of no breaks are in that room? Let's be honest here, and you're looking at them, and I would even say to the plant manager, so why don't you come and hang out with me for the 12 hours? Understand what it's like. And yet, here's the best example of it, because every single person in that room has lived it. Every single person in that room knows how difficult it is and the aches in their legs and how their back hurts. And you know what? The boss knows it too. But in some ways, until you confront them with all these people, the boss doesn't have to own it.
That's right. But here's another piece of the puzzle, okay? It's figuring out within the mix how to appeal to the company's self-interest. And one of the key pieces in my resolving many a health and safety issue is pointing out to the company how their workers' comp costs are going to be reduced.
Right.
If they fix the problem.
Right.
And yet, because right and wrong doesn't get through to these people.
Absolutely.
But figuring out a way to appeal to their self-interest does.
Oh, this is so interesting. Cost-benefit analysis.
That's right.
We did an interview yesterday with a guy from Australia who was talking about soil as the carbon sponge. And I'm sitting here going, oh, my God, so granola. Except by the time he got done, you were really ticked off. Because when you understood the cost-benefit analysis, oh, my God. What kind of fools are we? There was such a benefit. There was a win-win-win-win-win for almost every player if they understood what it was we could do. And now we're looking at the fires in Tennessee, and he could even explain to a large extent what it was that happened to the soil that exacerbated these fires that are more devastating than we could ever have imagined, like the fires in California and the drought in California. And there are things we can do. Yeah, maybe they're not sexy, but when you look at the cost-benefit analysis, you're absolutely right. It's not about what's right and wrong. It's about what do I get out of it. And you were able to sort of point to them, not only do these people get the hour break, you get to save some money too. Oh my God, why aren't you doing this?
That's exactly right. Look, something I want to insert here, if I could. So after, about 5 months or so of this, I had actually taken the company and the local where it's always my objective to take them, which is to having a win-win bargaining relationship. In The Art of War by Sun Tzu, he says the object of war is always peace. And that's an important thing to always keep in mind. But then, amazingly, this company I was dealing with at the time was the second company to own this plant within the 6 months I had been there.
Oh, my God.
But then, because of poor administration of the business, and I go into it in obviously more detail in the book, the plant shuts and is reopened by a third employer who is one of the most anti-union, union-busting companies in America. And that's when all hell really breaks loose.
Yeah.
Because everything we accomplished in the first half of the campaign is suddenly put at risk by a new employer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want people to also understand, if you are seeing this kind of churning of the company, one employer, another employer, you know that every time someone walks out, they're going to drain the profits. They're going to drain the excesses. They're going to drain the incentive to invest in that plant or invest in those workers. And to go through so many owners in such a short period of time, what does it leave you with? There's not even a skeleton left because everybody has a profit incentive, not an investment incentive.
That's right. Though in this particular case, it's interesting. The plant was taken over by a Hong Kong investor from a rich textile family in China who, I don't kind of want to spoil the storyline for your audience, but was really out of his depth in trying to run his own company in a country he wasn't familiar with.
Right.
So it was really just poor business decisions that caused his efforts to fail and left the company kind of on the auction block for a scavenging company to pick up.
So let me just say something. What scares me is that I think in a way that you're talking about this Asian guy who buys the company who wasn't prepared for it. He obviously had the money. He obviously could make the acquisition, but he didn't really know how to handle the job or make the right kind of decision making. It kind of reminds me of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is like he's taken over this role as president. He doesn't really have the experience. He doesn't have the knowledge. He's not exactly sure who to trust. He doesn't know exactly what the players are. And I keep thinking, this deal maker, this guy may have been wildly successful in Asia, but he wasn't wildly successful in this environment. Donald Trump may be wildly successful, with his casinos and his golf courses and his Trump towers. That doesn't always translate into being a wildly successful president. And I kind of feel like what you're describing with this owner is a little bit what we're sort of describing with Donald Trump, who now kind of owns us.
I wouldn't have thought of it in that light, but that's actually a really brilliant analogy. Because Donald Trump, I read a quote from a politician in Ireland who said, Donald Trump doesn't even know how to spell foreign policy, let alone have one.
Well, on that note, I need to let you go. Phil Cohen has been joining us. He wrote a book, The Jackson Project, War in the American Workplace, a memoir. Thank you very much for joining us. And
thank you for having me, Arnie. I enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure.
We're ending the show with one of the songs from your CD, Phil. Thanks so much for sending it to us.
So thank you as well. Ciao. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right.
Take
bye-bye.
care.
All right. This is The Attitude with Arnie Arnesen and Susan Bruce. See you tomorrow.
Love